Okay, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings from Aotearoa, New Zealand, halfway around the world from a lot of you, where it is a cheery morning, early morning as well. So it's good to be here. And just in terms of what I want to talk about today, a little bit of some uh, introductory comments, and then six particular thoughts that I've been thinking about over probably the last 2 or 3 years with respect to digital theology and its sort of global community, both scholars and practitioners and things like that, which then I think might lead into some further thinking. And some of this stuff came up yesterday in the sort of discussion that we had towards the end of yesterday as well, and then some suggestions as well. So just in terms of, for those of you who don't know me, so I've been doing sort of digital theology, even if it wasn't being called that, for about the last 25 years. And I have a background in computer science and as well as in theology. And I've been particularly thinking about, what does the global mean when we talk about, say, a global network for digital theology or the global community? And when we're talking about digital theology, are we thinking about a particular theology, or do we mean many theologies? Is our experience of events like this meaning that the kind of thing that we're engaging with tends to be very similar theologically, or are we encountering theologies we might not really know that much about as well? Are we talking about a specific way of doing theology? Is there particular methodologies that defines this? Are we restricted to Christian theology or theologies? Would we have presenters, say, presenting aspects of a Muslim digital theology, or a Hindu digital theology, or so forth? The way in which relationships between global and local, perhaps that sort of global type expression, does our global digital theology engage with ethnic and cultural diversity? Is our digital theology perhaps also involved with interfaith or interreligious dialogue as part of that, as other members of different religious communities might be wrestling with some of the same things and become dialogue partners in that? And then one of the things that, for those of you who've heard me speak over the last couple of years, coming through is, who is missing from our conversations? If we're a global network for digital theology and that kind of thing, who is missing from these conversations, who we might have? I see there's been some stuff in the Discord chat about saying, well, where are the voices maybe from India or from China, or with respect to what's going on there? So why are they missing? And then very much a reflexive question back to myself: how might I be complicit in them being absent as well? How might I be contributing to barriers that prevent that as well? So I've got sort of six thoughts around this, and so we'll crack on with those. So back in 2022, a number of us, Frederica, Thomas, and myself, organized a digital public theology stream at the 2022 Global Network for Public Theology in Curitiba. And you can see there were the papers that were presented, and some of those people are here presenting papers as well. But one paper stuck out particularly for me, which was Carlos Olivares' paper. Carlos is a Chilean who works in Brazil. He's an Adventist New Testament scholar. And his paper was on how does he do good, critical New Testament research when the barriers to accessing the information and the resources to doing that prevented him from engaging with the stuff that the guild expected him to engage with, to be doing real research. And so there was quite a long ethical discussion around, his, say, for example, his institution couldn't afford to have the International Journal of Public Theology, which was the conference's journal. They couldn't afford to have it. So how did he access the materials in that in order to prepare for this? And so one of the thoughts that's been running through my mind as I've been going around this is, as we do global digital theology, are we providing access to those resources, or where are we creating, where are we having our discussions and dialogues, and whose voices are unable then to participate either fully or at all in that kind of thing. So that's one particular thought that's going along. The second thing is I've been working with a number of graduate students who are engaging with digital media, technology, and culture. And then on one hand, I have lots of different examples, but broadly, I have students who ignore their contexts. So they would typically pick up someone's work from Europe or from the US or from somewhere, and then apply it uncritically to the context of Aotearoa, New Zealand. And that sort of assumes a homogeneity of digital cultures, of methodologies, and maybe assuming a homogeneity of their own context in terms of church and theology and society. And then on the other hand, I have students who really want to use appropriate contextual methodologies to engage with digital cultures. That might be a kaupapa Māori methodology. It might be a Pacific methodology like Tūlava or Talanoa as well. I note we've got, occasionally it comes up with some of my students with Ubuntu from an African context as well. And so they're wanting contextual voices engaging with digital culture to inform them. And so I'm always like, who can they talk to about this? Who is missing from the conversation? Or if people have written to this, how do we access it and get it into the hands of people who want to do this? And then how can we support those students to then go on themselves to actually contribute back to the community with their insights that they develop out of their things here? In 2023, I went to a conference on the ethical and social implications of artificial intelligence, East Asia and beyond, a conference in Hong Kong, run out of the Hong Kong Baptist University. It was an interdisciplinary conference, and which was really good. You know, some theologians, but philosophers, engineers, computer scientists, journalists, and others as well, reflecting on particularly ethics and social implications of AI. But three papers here stuck out for me when I'm thinking about these kinds of things. The first was Wachul Son's paper on the social acceptance of AI in Korea, and particularly his observations of the uncritical acceptance of AI, particularly within church communities in the South Korean context. As well, a really interesting paper on that kind of thing. So when I was in Korea in March, I asked some of the other theologians there about this, but they weren't really interested in talking about technology. It wasn't something they were thinking about or were wanting to talk about. It's quite an interesting experience. Philip Butler, the African-American theologian in Denver, he's developing large language models trained on African-American texts so that there is a body of literature or body of material being engaged with that actually is in the dialect and vernacular of those communities. So a parallel thing alongside perhaps the homogenizing of language within generative AI and things like that as well. And Karen Howe, who wrote on the ethical issues around ChatGPT, and in particular, the human cost of it being built. And while companies like OpenAI are quite small, they subcontract other contractors who go to the majority world, who then employ vast quantities of people to do the training of the AI on material like hate speech and on child pornography and on violence and on abuse and stuff like that, with no care for those people who are paid poorly, but we're using a nice whiz-bang system, but it's actually built on indentured labor, which you don't know about. So those sort of things came up. Again, Levi Checketts, who helped organize the conference, the recent book out on poor technology, artificial intelligence, and the experience of poverty. Again, Catholic social teaching engaged with that, but also this, from the underside, what does AI look like as well? And then some other thoughts here, conversations with friends and colleagues outside of that US, Europe, access for publishing and resources. I mentioned Carlos' paper, but talking to my Pacific colleagues, they say, well, we write a journal article, we write a book chapter, and then it goes into a journal, it goes into a book, we lose control of it, and then our institution can't afford to buy it back. So what do we do? How do we contribute? How are our voices held there? And that's sort of those barriers for the majority world institutions and scholars. And it's not just money. I'm just going to put my hand up here and say, I have done an uncountable number of conferences at 2 o'clock in the morning when I'm meant to be at my best to present a paper, when everybody else is just sitting there having had their lunch and sort of looking out the window at the sun. Sometimes the barriers are interesting as well. A global network perhaps takes some of that into account. Maybe we get more people from this part of the world in there if the time zones are shifted. There's also a loss of dignity and power. There are rules of the guild that are set up, how you must engage with that, and that sort of privilege attached to geography and resourcing and language. So as a global network for digital theology, how are we paying attention to those things? How are we trying to reduce those barriers to make ourselves a truly global community? Here's another thing. A friend and colleague of mine, Steve will probably know him as well, Tahira Paenga, Maori theologian, recently defended his thesis on Maori theology in and the performing arts. He talks about atuatanga. He talks about Maori theology. And in particular, he was thinking about things that are performed, like hymns and stuff, and how you have te kupu, the word, te waiata, the song, te tu, the physical performance, and how the text isn't a text on its own of these things. There are the words, but then there's the tones of how it's performed, there's the actual music, and the performance that then becomes part of the performer or the performing community. It's multisensory and sacred, and how this is a different understanding maybe of texts and of their significance and sacredness than we might have for the generative AI or big data that treats text simply as maybe intellectual property, and we're looking at copyright, but actually a text is divorced from them actually being part of a human person or part of a community. And what violence do these systems do, and ways of thinking about text and data do to persons and communities and cultures, because there's a completely different operating model for thinking about these things. A text is a neutral, maybe, just something you can purchase, whereas these texts are actually part of who this community are as well. And then finally, the sixth point was, the questions that are repeated in the face of technological change. What is it that makes us human? Are our creations impinging on our humanness? Do our creations diminish our humanity? It's quite interesting, with the last 2 years of generative AI, all these people are saying, oh, we must think about this, we must think about this. And yet, in the 1990s and 2000s, there was significant theological thinking done on artificial intelligence. Yes, it wasn't at the stage where it is now with certain things, but a lot of really deep thinking was done. And almost we need to go back and recover that thinking and then bring it into dialogue with the contemporary situation. So these questions around what it makes us human and impinging on our humanness, someone like Anne First's work, where she's saying how we think about robots, how we think about how we treat them, actually tells us more about ourselves than the robots. We create an indentured computer systems that are indentured to us to perform labor. That tells us still about our tendency to want to enslave things and things like this. So, there's some good thinking that's been done recovering those. And then also we have these competing notions of, ontology and of epistemology, different ways of thinking about things, different worldviews, and different sorts of ethics. And that's why I've been encouraged when I've seen some of the work here. So McQuaina's work, a holistic Ubuntu artificial intelligence ethics approach, or Koya Wakauta's the digital VAR, negotiating social spatial relationships in cyberspace, place and time. This sort of decolonial, post-colonial thinking, where actually they've got different approaches which can both inform those in different communities, but also can be genuinely authentic to what they're wrestling with in their questions. Where do we go from here? It was nice to see some of those questions that are coming up for the discussions, or have been. What collaborations have we needed? Who else? And just in terms of just mapping this, so I've had a look here and said, well, where is the digital theology? I also do this with digital religion, but I don't have time for that. And so this is where I see the current sort of locuses of digital theology work happening, in terms of people publishing and people being based here. And you can see India is a bit of a hole at the moment. I don't really know of any strong digital theology work coming out of India. And that could be me not knowing it's there, but I don't come across it in my own work. East Africa, North Africa, Central Africa, no, but certainly Southern Africa, there's an increasing voice, and West Africa. Brazil in particular, people like Elena's work there, Certainly that US European access up into Scandinavia and stuff, and then beginning to see that work through South Korea and so forth. Just in terms of publishing, this is where all the Global Network for Digital Theology papers that we've had at conferences and talks, where they've come from. And you can see 66% of them are from North America and Europe across that. And you might say, well, is that changing? Is that not? So I did a little bit of a time series to see here and to see where things were going. And so, that original thing back in 2019, where we sort of kicked it off, it was Europe, North America, and me from Oceania. And then we start to see now we're in 2024, there's still a really dominant, strong European presence, but we're starting to see other continents as well. And to be honest, this is back of the napkin stuff. I've gone through every paper. I've made a decision where I'm going to put the author and things like that. And I'm not including panel chairs and things, but I think there is a shift, but at the same time, it's still heavily weighted to the European context, European methodologies, European projects. And so that's something, for us to be thinking about in that particular kind of stuff. Some of this other stuff, which is encouraging, coming around the Rome call for ethics, with the Vatican engaging with a whole lot of both politics and technology companies and things around that, and then bringing in Muslim and Jewish communities to that. AI and ethics in higher education, that stuff as well is really important, where you've got people like Aaron Green and Roland Chur who've been part of this community, but now also engaging with higher education. Same with digital justice coming out of the World Council of Churches and that conference I mentioned before. So just in terms of wrapping up with some suggestions here, I think if we're a genuinely global network for doing digital theology, then actually we need to be reaching out to others in a spirit of collegiality and hospitality. We actually maybe have to be going to them rather than waiting for them to come to us, inviting others. So we look at our thing and say, well, actually, we've got no one from India, and yet we're talking over 1 billion people, and there must be something there. There is stuff there. Let's go out there and find people to come and speak into these kinds of things, supporting their endeavors, asking who's missing. Interdisciplinary collaboration, not just with the academy, but across all aspects of life. The truism about public theology is it's too important to be left to the theologians. So you need to do that. Embodying, I suppose, an epistemic humility, that there are other ontologies, epistemologies, methodologies, and a robust cultural awareness and respect to be developed as part of this. Theological generosity as well. And, both within the Christian tradition. I heard a really interesting paper from Eastern Orthodox archimandrite connecting patristic thought with the internet. That's the sort of thing I'd like to hear more of, that kind of thing, as well as, interreligious, interfaith dialogue. And then this whole idea of what are we offering in the way of practical wisdom for human flourishing, and then the wider flourishing of the world as well. So anyway, that's my spiel. And so I'll stop that.